Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
So I want the scariest stories you got. Woods stories. Unexplained monster sightings. I want it all. Scary story thread. Preferably what you've experienced.
The creepiest shit I've experienced happened to me on my way home one dark night at 1 a.m. Walking down a street that came out of the woods and, on the path I was walking on, ran next to these woods. Now there was a kindergarten and a hotel on this part of the street, which is called Römerstraße, which translates to Romans Street. Behind the hotel, and I mean directly behind it, was an intersection, where I would have to take a left, and around that intersection and next to the street is the forest. As I approached the hotel, walking on the pavement, I saw a black cloaked and hooded figure standing in front of the hotel at the intersection, facing the woods. I shat my pants and walked onto the actual street but still advanced. As I did so, the cloaked figure took off its hood and revealed itself to be a pretty red-headed woman, staring into the woods with her icy blue eyes. As I drew closer, I noticed that the cloak was open and that she was wearing a scarlet corsage and that she was also barefooted. This all seemed very strange to me, keeping in mind that I was 16 at the time. I was both amazed and scared shitless at the same time, and I still had to take that left turn, which meant having to pass the stranger closely or staying on the street. I chose the street, and felt weirded out even more when I saw this A1 copy of the G-Man coming up to the intersection from my destined direction. I slow down and let him approach the woman. He taps her on the shoulder and talks to her. I didn't hear what he said, but it made the girl follow the man back from where he came and onto the hotel's premises. I know this sounds incredible. This is a true story.
In the woods, on the eastern side of my small hometown, there is a rather curious structure. A walled garden with a large greenhouse and a dilapidated rookery. I have been there many times and the place just has this strange feel about it. There is a ruined building on the wall with the now destroyed greenhouse. This building has a large exposed basement that holds some kind of boiler. One time whilst I was there alone, I entered the garden through one of the small doors and walked a quarter of the way across it. I sensed something. I could hear a dog sniffing the ground at my feet and another dog growling a short way away. I could barely move for fear, but managed to step back once. Both dogs growled and then there was silence. After a few minutes, I composed myself and left. I haven't been back there for years. Afterwards, my brother told me that he saw something when he was there too. He was in the basement of the building looking around and kicking over rocks when his friend said something. My brother turned to look at his friend, but could only see a man, standing on the edge of the basement looking down at him. My brother tells me he has never been so afraid than looking up at this man, standing there where his friend should be. The ghost wore a blood-stained jumper and most of the hair on his head had been burnt off. I say ghost, because after a couple of seconds the man vanished. My brother climbed out of the basement, found his friend and left. I know that the large house near the forest was once used as a hospital/sanitarium around the turn of the century, 1890-something to 1900-something. My grandfather used to go to this garden in the woods and dig up the ground to try and find old medicine bottles. The bottles vary greatly in colors and sizes, and my grandfather had a modest collection of them. I wish I had asked him about the history of the grounds, and if he ever saw or felt anything there, but sadly he drank himself to death a few years ago.
One night I was driving home from work It was late as fuck and super dark and my mom stayed out in this two-story house with her husband. I lived with them at the time. They were the only house for I would say a good 5 or 6 miles, nothing but forest all around. My stepdad was a contractor and construction guy. He built the house like 25 years ago. Anyway, I am driving along the winding narrow road. I come around this corner and there is something crossing the street. Being the gentleman that I am, I slam on the brakes. It was small. I thought it was a rabbit. It slowly rolls across the street in front of me. It's colorful. I get out and look at it crawling in front of my headlight. It's a little toy train. It is rolling and making little toy noises. I walk up to it and pick it up, thinking maybe it was on an elevated section of road or the wind maybe. No, it's on a timer. You have to wind this toy up. While I am looking at it, the timer goes off. I wind it up fully and it chugs for about 20 seconds. Someone had wound it up right before I drove up on it. Thinking one of my friends is playing tricks on me, lived in a small town, immediately dismissed it as a joke. I went to the trunk of my car and got the tire iron out and the flashlight and started patrolling through the woods, yelling out names of friends. I keep looking for about 5 minutes when my car horn starts blaring. Laughing it off, I run back to the car and there is no one there. I said fuck it and went home. I got home and parked where I always parked, killed the engine and stared inside. I was about halfway to the door when my car horn started blaring. I turn around and look at my car, which I had locked. I see no one inside. I realized someone had gotten into my car while I was out in the woods 10 minutes before. I go inside and call the police. They arrive 15 to 20 minutes later. The trunk to my car is open, no one inside.
Weird shit in the woods, eh? I have one of those stories. Back in 2007, I lived with my family in North Carolina. I was in the 10th grade at the time. That's not especially relevant, but noteworthy I suppose. Anyway, behind our house was a wooded area that had always kind of creeped me out for whatever reason. It just had this really ominous feeling to it. One day during Christmas break, my older brother and I decided, hey, let's go fuck around in those woods. I mean, as creepy as they were, it's not like anything particularly dangerous lived back there. So, we strapped on our boots, put on some jackets because it was fucking cold outside, and set off. After walking for about an hour, we found this old, derelict house. It had to be from at least the late 1800s or early 1900s. Since it was in the middle of the fucking woods and obviously abandoned, we kicked the door in and went exploring. The house held nothing noteworthy, a few pictures here and there but nothing else. Our perusing led us up to the second story. Once more, nothing noteworthy, but when we looked out the window, we saw something odd. There was an old guy in a brown jacket and a trucker hat digging a hole. To be more specific, it seemed to be a grave. Somehow he determined he was being watched and looked up at where we were. Our eyes met. My bro and I bolted. We got back to our house, locked ourselves inside, and sat there in silence, fully expecting him to come through the door at any moment. TLDR, fuck the woods.
This one time I was with my brother in his truck. We stopped off at his friend's house, and they were all outside just talking while I was sitting in the car. And I live in East Texas, where every place you turn, there are woods. Well, there are woods straight ahead of where I'm looking. Everyone has their back turned to the woods. It's daytime as well, which I thought was odd. I'm sitting there just thinking about shit when all of a sudden I see this fucking huge thing. Probably about 8 feet, walk up behind a tree. It was walking on 2 legs, and its shoulder width were really large and it was pretty massive. It walked up behind a tree. And the tree was small as fuck, but somehow it hit his body. I noped the fuck out, thinking, did I really just see that? As soon as I'm pondering this question, he peeks his head out. His large-ass head, staring right at me. Its body should have been visible by the tree, but for some reason, like I said, it was covering it. It pulls its head back in and never does anything else. This huge-ass monster disappeared, or went invisible or something. The closest thing I can describe it to was Bigfoot. It had orangish hair and a black face with hair all around it. It's just unexplainable by the way it vanished. I don't know, I kinda just disregarded the whole story until I had thought about it the other day.
Was at a school camp. I don't know whose twisted idea it was, but a teacher decided that it would be a nice activity to take a group out into the forest, somewhat 2 kilometers out, maybe more. Was a 15-minute walk directly into the forest. At about 11 p.m. For us to reflect on our lives and our goals in our life. We all left without torches in hand, 11:15 at the time, with our teacher leading us. A few people were left behind, approximately 1 kilometer between each person being dropped off. All were in random order. As each person was dropped off, the teacher took their torches, so they were left in pitch black forest alone. This was apparently meant to be nice and calming for them, a time to reflect on things. Nope. It was my turn to sit alone. Teacher took my torch and threw it into his backpack, and the rest of the group kept going. I would have been the 6th person out of a group of 10, so I was somewhat right in the fucking middle. So as any normal person would, I freaked the fuck out, sat down on a tree's roots, and then my senses went on overdrive. Ears felt like an elf's, pinned up and pointy as far as they could to pick up any noise. Funnily enough, I heard a branch crack. There was no use turning around to look because it was pitch black, though I did anyway. I had a lighter in my pocket and turned it on to comfort me. Bad idea. When I had it on is when shit started to go down. I started hearing my group talking as if they were coming back around to pick me up to go back to camp, and heard footsteps coming my way, sitting waiting anxiously for their arrival. It kept going on for at least 5 minutes. I still had the lighter on, and thinking back on it now, having a light being the center of attention in a pitch black forest was not the brightest idea I've ever had. I heard my teacher call me over down the hiking path, saying that we were going now. It came from the right, but there were still people to be picked up from the left part of the path. I stood up, brushed myself, shaking like a dog. I started stepping over, and then there was silence, and I could feel an overwhelming feeling of being watched. Senses were peaking and heart was beating like hell. I heard something along the path growl and make its way towards me. At that point I fucking noped and sprinted along the track to the nearest person that had been dropped off. It felt like fucking forever before I met the next person. I finally got to them and they were panicking. We didn't say a thing because we knew what happened to both of us. We sat there sitting together shoulder to shoulder like little bitches before we saw torch lights shining our way and a group of people talking, yelling and making jokes. It was our teacher and group, teachers who didn't look very happy that I had left where I was dropped off. I explained to him what happened and he just thought I was being a little shit. Got back to our camp dorms and our group all exchanged stories, etc., and what we thought of when we were there. 2 others said they heard the same thing that I did and that they found it really weird and unsettling. Teacher said it was just our imagination running wild, but to this day, I can't believe that it was only my imagination. Might be some missing spots, but you can't blame me. It was a good 7 years ago at a school camp. Worst camp activity fucking ever.
Okay, so I'm a very skeptical person, but this is completely weird and I've never been able to explain it to myself. In 2004, I was but a wee 13-year-old lad in a St. Louis, Missouri suburb. One day I was walking to my local Hollywood Video to rent a film. This was a roughly 2-mile walk through light forest and occasional streets. So I'm walking underneath a bridge for the Metrolink train, and as I remember looking to my right at a cell phone tower which was maybe 25 feet from the roadway, I glanced down and at the side of the road was a small black shape. I bent down and picked it up. It was a badge which said DEA Special Agent. It was seated in a leather sort of shield for the back, and was definitely real. Way too much detail on it for it to be fake. So being a 13-year-old who was already obsessed with phones and radios, and just beginning to see the world through those eyes, this was amazing. I mean, what a cool thing to find and have. This was gonna be a great memento, right? I didn't tell anyone. I was kind of a loner as a kid, and I didn't want anyone to know what I'd found. So I put it in my desk, safely in the back. I was given great privacy as a kid, and no one ever went through my stuff. 1 week later, it was gone. I had looked at it a few times after getting it. And one day as I went to look it over, it was nowhere to be found. I mounted an extensive searching effort, but no trace of it ever turned up. Nothing. What the hell happened? Another time in 2005, me and a friend I'd met through an online phone hacker forum were urban exploring in an industrial area on the outskirts of Chicago after a Chicago 2600 meeting. They ran all night back then. We wandered deep into massive old warehouses, some unidentifiable factories, and urban wasteland. As we rounded the bend into the rear courtyard of a rather large building, we saw lights approaching from behind us. We ran to a dumpster and hid behind it just in time.
I have a bit of a woods adventure story. It's not the spookiest, but it was 100% real. So I start out in this heavily wooded park area in a smaller town near mine. It's usually full of people who like to jog, bike, etc., and it's huge and sprawling. I start heading east from the entrance, which is very near the southwest corner of the park. At first, it's all nice, there's people jogging, etc. But I have an explorer in me, and I start to go off the path a bit. Eventually, I find myself lost in woods, and try to make my way out, but instead find myself at an unfamiliar, more weathered path. The woods around this path are rather thin, and I can see off in the distance a freeway, which is near the entrance, in the opposite direction I thought it was. I shrug, and figure since I know where the entrance is again, I can safely keep exploring. Now I make it into an area where the path is surrounded by large bushes of raspberries and blackberries and whatnot. Big, thorny bushes. I can't see the freeway from there, and I'm lost again, and I am starting to hear noises in the bushes beside me, rustling mostly. I start feeling unsettled by all that, and keep going. I finally make my way to a large fenced-off area. Here, I find a large reservoir-type water feature, and an abandoned gas station. It must have been abandoned ages ago, because the prices were still around 1.69 per gallon, but it looks rather well kept, despite being empty. Slowly, an old battered and white van with barely functioning headlights worked its way down the side alley access road. It drove towards one of the entrances in the rear, and I began to look over this building. It was a factory of some sort, but all the windows were purposely obscured with a sort of red cloth. The van parked and immediately, two large men walked out to the rear of the van, opened it and led at least 20 or 25 people from the rear. But the way these two men surrounded these people, they were being very intimidating and at one point pushed one of the figures down in the dirt. The entire group was led into the main building through a freight door, offering us a brief glimpse of an industrial area. Human trafficking, man. Later on, that same friend disappeared. He was a few years younger than me, which would have made him 12 between and 14 at the time of this incident. This was December 2005. We talked steadily over the first half of 2006, then one day, nothing. His phone shut off, all email accounts went quiet, AIM and Facebook went quiet. It was extremely disturbing considering who he was. He was notorious on our forums for being a massive attention whore and posting a truly amazing level of photography, documenting even the most mundane details of his life. So the group at hand obviously has many resources to find people. And we put them to use. The various details we have on him, full name, address, are searched and all of his records literally disappear. There is no missing persons report, nothing. The only family he has is a Polish immigrant mother who doesn't speak English, and whenever she was asked about him, he would immediately hang up the phone. Something wasn't right. I tried to find out when the last time he had definitively been seen was. A mutual friend had seen him at a Chicago 2600 meeting sometime in the first half of 2006. He said the kid seemed dazed and scared. He was there for an hour, sitting in a corner, then left. The oddest thing about this gas station is the complete lack of road access. It's in the middle of a forest, with nothing but this huge reservoir and a couple small walking paths around. Either way, I stop to pee into the reservoir, and check on my iPhone to see where I am exactly. My iPhone's map places me on the far west end, where I most definitely am not. Great. Even better, after looking in the area a bunch, I can't find any sort of water in the area at all, aside from a stream in the park section, which I already knew about. I figure the map app is bullshit, and give up on it. Now things get really odd. So I go back into the bush woods, this time trying to make sure I head west and only west, since I've been going almost entirely east this time. I make it to a large, gnarled tree, with a bunch of torn tire treads hanging from its branches, like some weirdo decorated it. Pass by that, and eventually come across a large fence with barbed wire on top. After some searching, I make it to a small gap in the fence, rolled away at the corner, probably by some guy. On the other side of the fence, I can see a sign which says, "Private property trespassers will be shot." Oops. I guess I shouldn't have been there. This is now back into a thinly wooded area, and I can see the freeway again, on the other side of a rather thickly wooded area. I start hurrying in that direction, now dead tired and kinda paranoid due to everything that I just saw. That's when I hear a sound, something like a mountain lion scream. There's a lot that could have made that sound besides that, and it was far away, but I was feeling paranoid, and I started running toward the freeway. Finally, I find my way back to familiar areas. The nice paths through the woods, the stream, and joggers and bikers everywhere. I wandered a bit, and near the entrance, I found some stoners who shared some weed, and managed to calm myself down.
I have two that took place in the same woods. Well, the second one was just outside this forest. So, there is this park in my neighborhood where now, everyone goes to smoke weed and do other shit, but when we were kids, so about 1990 to 2003, the place was infested with homeless people. So my parents said, so everybody stayed away from this park, or at least past curfew we did. Until one day, me and my neighbor were chilling in my front yard and my sister and her friend approached us asking if we wanted to go explore the woods. Now, none of us have ever set foot in this infamous woods, so this was a very odd question, but, as a stupid child would, we accepted the offer and headed off to the woods. I brought a bag of chips to throw on the ground behind us so we wouldn't get lost. As we approached the woods, everyone was very reluctant to enter. But we did. We headed down the trail. You had to go to the back of this trail to enter the forest. When we got to the back of the trail, there was a very small entrance into the forest, about the size of a hobbit door. My sister was the first to set foot in the forest. The first thing we hear is a loud gasp. We all asked what it was she saw. She said, "Guys, it's beautiful," and beautiful it was. There was a cut-down tree leaning over a small body of water from the rainfall the night before. There was a small entrance above us to let the sunshine in. All the leaves glistened from the sunlight. Certainly was a gorgeous sight, but what lay ahead wasn't. As we continued on, it slowly stopped being beautiful and began to turn frightening. Dead leaves, peeling trees, fungus, etc. After crossing the bridge or tree that was on the ground, we saw a tree with letters and words that we could not identify written in red spray paint. We foolishly continued on even though everyone was already frightened. The next thing we saw made my heart sink so deep I could have shitted it out. There was a scythe forced deep into a decaying tree. With the scythe came the disgusting stench that made us all want to heave. Imagine the smell of a dead body on top of the smell of a decaying forest. On the scythe there was red. It surely looked like blood, but we all convinced ourselves it was spray paint from the tree behind us. We stayed staring at the scythe for about 3 minutes until my friend tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to the left of me. Remember when I said, my heart sank so deep I could have shattered it out? Well, this time I actually did. As I turned my head to the left, I began to see a man. I could not fully see him due to the trees blocking my field of vision, but it was a man. I was in shock. We exchanged glances at each other for a good 30 to 40 seconds until my sister noticed him and began to run. They all flew past me as I stood there staring at him. I don't know what it was, but I was mesmerized by him. I heard my friend yelling for me, so I snapped out of it and began to run away. Not even 20 feet away from where I was before, I looked back and saw no man, no nothing. The scythe was on the ground. I was petrified, running for my life. I noticed a pile of dead, decaying bird corpses lying just next to a chip I placed on the ground. There had to be 20 of them. They were not there before. We ran all the way home. Never spoke a word of it to anyone. The second story isn't long at all. Shit. It's barely a story, just kinda creepy. Skip forward about 5 years. It was around 10 o'clock when me and my 3 friends decided to go to the park to get baked. We sat at this basketball court right in front of the trail leading into the forest. We had brought bug spray cause the mosquitoes were fucking insane that year. We all sat in a circle and the bug spray was directly behind me. I know for a fact I put it behind me. After we finished our first bowl, one decided one needed some bug spray, but when I turned to grab it, it was gone. None of my friends had taken it, that I'm sure of. But when I had first turned around, the smell of dead body and decaying forest lingered in the air. I had instant flashbacks to the day I went inside the forest. At that instant I knew the man was watching us. I darted out as fast as I could, not even tell my friends to follow, but obviously they did. I never told them why I ran off all of a sudden. They still sometimes ask why. I'll never tell them. They'll never believe me.
The following story seems like it has been translated from another language.
Okay, so look, as you can see, there is a forest splitting 2 parts of my town. Now I live on the left side of that forest, which I didn't really mind, since you know a forest is quite funny as a kid, and as you grow older you can use it to get some fresh air and a tiny bit of nature in a city. I never really had a reason to use that bridge to get to the other side until I became friends with a boy who lived on the right side of that forest. He didn't live that far away from it either, so it was just through the forest and I had just to walk some meters and it's soccer time. Now getting to him I had many options, some a lot easier to do than others. I could take the bus that drives over that bridge and be there in about 10 minutes. I could walk over that bridge, or I could take the bike and drive through the forest, which was really the shortest and easiest way for me to do it. I became school friends with him in February, and in the beginning of spring we started playing soccer. I met the guys who also lived in his area and became good friends with all of them. Every day after playing with them I'd ride my bike home through the forest. It wasn't really dark, but the sun wasn't showing either. But little me was just happy with the feeling of friends and having fun that he forgot everything around him. In the winter I couldn't use my bike anymore since the whole forest was either full of ice, snow, or both. I had to walk over there. Walking took a lot longer than biking did because I had to walk slowly because of the ice, and walking in general is slower. Even though it was winter we still had a lot of fun and time flew by, and it was dark before I knew it. I went my way and entered the forest. I didn't think anything of it since it wasn't only the forest at that time, it was my forest. I grew up with it, I knew the trees, I knew the shortcuts, I just knew everything about it. But as I got deeper into the forest the silence got bigger. Then as I was about in the center of the forest, right at that point where civilization was the furthest away from little me, it hit me. I got chills and I felt something really heavy on my whole body. I thought someone was looking at me, but I didn't see anyone. I thought about running home the distance or at least out of the forest as fast as possible, but something in my head told me that if I started running now I'd regret it my whole life. I was crying rivers but didn't make a single noise. After about 5 minutes something broke the silence. A pair of dogs ran to me and followed their owner. I was relieved and all the tension that was in my body before was gone now. The rest of the way home I was just happy that nothing happened, and the next day I told myself that I'm a pussy and I shouldn't be afraid and that it was probably nothing. Even though I knew there was nothing there, I now walked the route over the bridge instead of through the forest to get to the other side, and it was all well. Winter passed and I got older. I still visited that forest many times with my friends and came to the conclusion that I was just a little kid with a blooming fantasy. I picked up boxing and was now a confident young man at the verge of adulthood. My trainer told me that my stamina was bad and that I'd have to start running or I wouldn't make it far. No problem for me, I got a forest right next to my place and I can jog there anytime I want. I started jogging and I saw old relics from my childhood, trees my brother and I used to climb and that stuff you know. I jogged until I was at my limit, which went from 1 hour to 2. As my time limit got longer my routes did, and the more time passed the darker it got. One winter day I looked outside but it was already dark. I didn't really care though. At that time I got dressed and started jogging. I don't know if I should call this my biggest mistake or my best decision ever, but let me just go on. I walked the way to the forest and as I got nearer my breathing got heavier until I was finally there, right in front of the forest. Normally I'd start jogging as soon as I could see it, but this time I didn't. It wasn't that I didn't want to, so my body refused to jog. I slowly walked up to the entrance and I felt small, like a little child. The trees looked huge to me, as if they were hundreds of meters high, and the forest looked dark as if the sun couldn't even reach it. I was terrified, but my mind won over my body. I'm a grown man and I can beat up anyone I know. What do I have to fear? I let out a shout to release the tension and started jogging, but it was cold. Not only outside, my whole body was cold, my heart was cold. I could only breathe in the cold and my whole body was cold. I just didn't feel well. There I was jogging and looking around with my head like a maniac, as if I was searching for something. That was a huge mistake. With each step it got quieter and quieter until it got silent. It got silent again. I was afraid because I remembered that silence. It was horrifying. I didn't turn and walk back out. I thought of the quickest route to the main street from here on and how I could take it without seeming all too suspicious that I would want to leave quickly. As I walked I saw someone walking to me. He wasn't walking towards me, he was walking to me. It was slow and resting, but it had a destination, me. As I got nearer I started to recognize his face. He was the old man from when I first had this feeling. Well, he looked at him but he somehow wasn't, he was anything but that old man. What I didn't realize was that I got slower. I stopped jogging and started walking, and there I was 10 meters away from my worst nightmare. Being the dangerous boy I am, I shouted at him, asked him what he wanted looking at and that he should be rather looking away. He stopped when I started talking and I just felt like going crazy. I could feel the tears getting ready to just shoot out of my eyes and my heart beating. It was beating so hard that my hands twitched with every heartbeat. Then I snapped. I walked faster towards him and grabbed him by his shirt and told him that he should fuck off. While touching him he just felt heavy. He had the body of a human but I just couldn't lift him. His body wasn't hard, it didn't feel special. I don't know how to explain it, it just felt heavy. Then I raised my hand and hit him in the chest, but he didn't even flinch. I was mortified because he didn't even move. I threw my strongest punch that knocked people out but he didn't even flinch. I on the other hand felt exhausted. I looked into his face and it seemed to me that he smiled, but he was totally expressionless. I just knew he was smiling. I shoved him to the ground and ran like I've never run before, but the heaviness didn't leave. My escape wasn't the prettiest and I hurt myself pretty good. I finally got out of the forest with a bloody hand and some cuts here and there. Once I walked a few more meters out of there, I sat down at the bus stop and just cried. It was 10 p.m. weekdays, so nobody saw me, but I wanted someone to see me. I wanted there to be other humans that would show me that I'm not alone anymore. My body was just broken. I didn't want to move anymore, I just wanted to be home. The bus came 10 minutes late and those were the longest 10 minutes in my life. I walked into the bus and sat down. The bus drove its way and we passed the forest. As I looked into it, I saw something. It wasn't human, but it wasn't a monster. Not like a hairy monster human or humanoid, I just saw something that was just there. It wasn't human, it was just something. I felt its presence until we passed the forest, and once I got home I got a little bit calmer. I went to the hospital and got my wounds fixed and never went into that forest again. So that's it, here I am now. I don't know what was there, and in all honesty I don't care. I know it won't hurt anyone since, well, it didn't really hurt me. I think it could have gotten me if it wanted to. If it can hurt humans, I don't want to press my luck. But still, if it does hurt humans, I kind of feel that it is my responsibility. I just don't know.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.